external presenters, and I think we are really able to give a very nice overview of the state of the art of ecosystem accounting today. And I really look forward to the program. I think I will leave it with that. And I think I would call on the first presenter. And I'm not sure, Carl, if Carl is presenting live or if that is a recorded message, actually.
No, it's live in principle.
It's live. Great. Thanks, Carl. Looking forward to your presentation.
I think I'm looking forward to it as well. Thank you very much to Alejandro and Lars. Hello, everybody. For those who don't know me, my name is Carl Obst. I was very closely involved, lead author and editor of the SEEA, and particularly on ecosystem accounting. There's a few names that I recognize, but and it would have been lovely to be in Madrid. But nonetheless, it seems that even if you're in Madrid, you can't necessarily be at the conference. I hope you're feeling better soon, Alejandro. When I was given the title of an overview of the SEEA EA, and knowing that this was the MAIA project, I wasn't quite sure how to pitch this to the extent that there were a lot of people who are very, very familiar with ecosystem accounting. And so I've tried to give a little bit of but I have sort of gone a little bit general, and hopefully I can share my screen and I'll take you through. I guess it's a little bit will be my take on ecosystem accounting and how it can play a great role. And probably, so not getting into more of the technical details about how it might be put together, because I think that will be the focus of the rest of the session, giving examples. So it's really a little bit more of a conceptual piece on where ecosystem accounting is placed in the landscape. So to start with, so what would be a basic rationale for natural capital accounting in the first instance? And here I've taken a few diagrams from different places. This broad motivation, which Repetto had in his quite well-known work about these limitations of GDP. So the SEEA itself came from this discussion that GDP was not a very complete measure. We needed to really understand what was happening with our natural capital base in order to tell a more complete story about the world around us. And so in that spirit, there's a large area of work that's been developing over the last 30 or 40 years around wealth accounting, where it looks at different types of capitals, understands how they can contribute to total wealth, and then be the basis for our long-term prosperity and well-being. So within that space, natural capital is obviously one of the things that we're looking at. And I've taken a definition of natural capital here from the Natural Capital Protocol, which was a document established by the Natural Capital Coalition, now formed into the Capitals Coalition back in 2016, kind of probably coming from a more group of stakeholders from the private sector, but all of these tell the same sort of story. And I think fundamental here is that we have a set of stocks, we want to understand the set of flows, and we want to understand the connections to business and society. And so it's this combination of stocks, flows, and values, which is really what we're trying to bring together. The motivation being that we're losing a lot of this natural capital that we have, and as a result, affecting our long-term prosperity and well-being. Another way to present that, again, shamelessly taking these things from other places. This is from a project called We Value Nature, and which I thought was quite a nice way of showing these sort of systemic linkages that we try and think about. So still looking at this stocks, flows, and values, but then linking to the idea that we need some solutions. This one's focused on nature-based solutions and a range of different possibilities there. But in a whole range of ways, we're trying to connect things together, because what we invest in when we think about solutions are the stocks. And we invest in the stocks in order to get the flows and the values that we're looking for. So that whole notion that these things are integrated and connected needs to underpin the way we're framing the measurement challenge that we have here. But then in that sense, given that context, what's the role for accounting? One of the things that has been difficult in this space is that much of the work in the sustainability space has been based on individual approaches which are all very often similarly motivated, many different types of indicators, many forms of analysis and assessment, all tackling slightly different variations on the question, but usually finding their own data sets to do whatever they want to do, slightly different definitions, slightly different measurement scopes, slightly different concepts. And the role that we see the SEEA playing is somehow to try and create a more integrated and coherent data set. So that the data set, still using the same range of data sets that we would currently have available to us, perhaps expanding that range because we identify data gaps, but using that coherent and integrated data to satisfy a range of different information requirements. And I've just listed a few there, of which natural capital accounts would be one of the outputs that you would deliver out of that coherent data set. So that way of seeing accounting as a synthesizing and integrating tool that doesn't replace anything at the moment, but it helps to bring things together and find sort of synergies and connections. In actual fact, if you were in a macroeconomic perspective, you take this for granted. You do all of your macroeconomic analysis, whether it's CGE modeling or input-output analysis or projections of GDP. There has long been a group of people, usually located in a statistics office, which develop the integrated and coherent data. We call it the national accounts, which comes from multiple data sources. And resources are placed into that integrated and coherence role. It also happens within corporates, within accounting departments. And our challenge in this space is how to extend that integrated and coherent role to also include environmental data. It's not just hanging off to the side. So the SEEA, I've given you a little bit of a sense of where it's come from or the motivation, but one of the key things that was established fairly early on in the process was that we see the economy as sitting within the environment. And that's quite fundamental. There are certain ways you could go about doing this whole measurement exercise where you see the economy as separate from the environment, or two systems sitting next to each other. Whereas what we want to do is try and portray them as the economy sitting within the environment, which gives this so a very close connection about flows that are coming from the environment into the economy, and then flows coming back out into the residual flows which come from the economy back to the environment. So that systems thinking and those connections is one of the key underpinning mindsets within the SEEA. The SEEA is composed of more than ecosystem accounting. There is also a document which was finalized in 2012 called the SEEA Central Framework. Collectively, those two documents, the blue one, the Central Framework, and the green one, Ecosystem Accounting, are intended to work in complementary fashion. And they cover collectively those four areas that I've described there in the figure. Environmental flows, so looking at flows of water, energy, emissions, waste, a whole range of physical accounting, physical flow accounting, a range of work on accounts for natural resources, looking at individual resources such as timber, fish, minerals, land, soil. So it includes, conceptually, we include carbon in that as an individual, in that sense, an element. So you can do biophysical measurements of those stocks, opening and closing and how they've changed, but also look at net present values of those resources, which is fairly standard practice or very long-standing practice in many areas. And then the environmental transactions, looking at taxes, subsidies, environmental protection expenditures, environmental goods and services, a whole range of economic transactions which are already recorded in standard national accounts. We try and draw them out. And then this whole area around ecosystem services and ecosystem assets, which I'll cover in a little bit more detail in a second. But there's also a whole range of there's sort of a big family of SEEA publications. I've mentioned a few there: SEEA Water, SEEA Energy, SEEA Applications and Extensions, etc. I put a +++ at the bottom because there is an expanding range of materials that keeps on developing. And I suspect that in the next presentation, or I hope that in the next presentation, Alessandra will be able to give you a sense of the types of activities which are underway at the moment. So more specifically to ecosystem accounting, at the heart of the ecosystem accounting approach is a model, which essentially is a stock and flow model, which I guess is where in part where the accounting story comes in, and with a sort of fairly common way of presenting that is a so-called, well, a 4-box, or that's presented here in terms of circles, a 4-box model where the stocks are represented in terms of measures of extent. When we're looking at ecosystems, will be in terms of area or hectares, and their condition. And that's coming a range of suggestions of the types of metrics you might look at for a forest ecosystem are there, but you would have different metrics that you would look at for, or different variables you would look at for different ecosystem types. The key being that we want to try and understand how the ecosystems are located in the landscape and how large they are. So that's the extent side of things, and then how their quality, integrity is changing over time. So that gives us the understanding of this stock that we would then invest in order to secure services into the future. So that stocks part is fundamental. And then on the flow side, it's where the concept of ecosystem services come into play. I've listed a range of different services that are included there. The SEEA ecosystem accounting has a table which has descriptions for, I think it's 30 different ecosystem services, which has come from a combination of various classification systems which exist around ecosystem services. The key point being that the definition of services from an accounting point of view is that the contribution of an ecosystem, the contribution of stock to benefits that people obtain. So those benefits will be standard measures of production and output, such as crops or livestock. There could be health benefits. There'll be a whole range of things which fall into the basket of benefits. And what we want to try and tackle with ecosystem services is the contribution of ecosystems to those benefits. Sometimes that boundary line can be a little bit blurry, and so that becomes a challenge in measurement. But conceptually, that's what we're trying to do, is understand that contribution of ecosystems and how that might be changing over time. One of the key features of ecosystem accounting is the idea that it's spatial and granular. We're taking the world and breaking it up into different ecosystem assets, where each ecosystem type, or a patch of forest, an area of cropland, an urban environment, each of those as a contiguous area is represented as an asset. So we're working at that fine scale and then trying to build up from there and trying to build this rich picture that recognizes that location and context is fundamental. The fact that you have a forest in one place and a forest in another place might give you a different bundle of services, either because they're closer to a city or further away, because they're a slightly different species mix, because some are used for forestry and some are not allowed to be logged. There's a whole range of contextual matters that we want to try and take into account. And that then the fortunate thing in a way is that we now start to have the data sets that allow us to do that. And the challenge then from an ecosystem accounting space is to how to utilize all of these different data layers in an effective way to tell these stories at this fine scale, but then also using it consistently across different areas, so that if you're looking at someone's measuring one forest and someone's measuring another forest, you can start to compare the results across different locations. And certainly every forest is different, but how can we compare them on a comparable type of basis? One of the things I wanted to introduce here, which I think perhaps is maybe more for those who are more familiar with ecosystem accounting, because it's not an area which is talked about very much. This is in chapter 2. This is direct from chapter 2 of the SEEA ecosystem accounting. And it highlights the point that when we talk about ecosystems, lots of people are measuring them for different reasons and with different perspectives. And one of the attempts from a statistical point of view is to try and organize information that would support consideration of all of these different perspectives. So this is a short section that's at the start of chapter 2 to try and see how it is that we can start to blend a common information set that can be used and takes into account different views. So there are 5 perspectives that were identified, one being a spatial perspective. Here we're using ecosystems as what's happening in the landscape. Can we delineate? You know, it goes to questions of deforestation or desertification. How do we know when we've got changes in area, land use changes that are taking place, and we want to understand from that point of view how we break the world up so we can understand those changes over time in a mutually exclusive way. So there's a spatial/statistical basis for thinking about ecosystems and using the concept of ecosystems. One that's more familiar from it is the ecological perspective and looking at this concept of condition. There's a whole, a vast literature around ecology with looking at ecosystem integrity, health, condition, lots of terms which are not all identical but similar in a way. But we're looking at these notions of resilience and all of those types of things. So that's another really important sort of perspective on the measurement story. Another one is the societal benefit, where we see these ecosystems as playing an important role and underpinning things. And that's really central to this notion of the concepts around ecosystem services, but you can extend it a little bit more broadly to pick up relational values, other value perspectives that sit that can be placed from that perspective. The notion of asset value starts to get into a more economic sort of notion, that you've got this future supply, and then we want to pick up notions around degradation and how that's changing, how the condition and the quality of the ecosystem is changing over time. And then we get into institutional ownership and management. So who is it that's looking after it? Who's responsible? Are there notions of stewardship? All of that. How do we allocate degradation costs, sort of polluter pays principle, or is it the person who's actually being affected? So all of these things are different ways we're trying to view ecosystems depending on the question we're asking. The attempt being made through ecosystem information set that allows you to consider all of those different perspectives. How successfully and completely it does that is, of course, a matter of judgment, but that's certainly been the ambition. To do that, we've organised the ecosystem accounts into 5 core accounts. The two types of accounts, there are accounts in physical terms, which are in the lighter blue in this figure, and accounts in monetary terms. The general way of framing this is to start at the top left corner around ecosystem extent and ecosystem condition accounts, which are measured in physical units, depending on the identifying ecosystem types and then the different characteristics that make up each ecosystem type. The next is ecosystem services, which often it will be characteristics around extent and condition that will underpin the flow of services. But ideally, we'd be measuring them distinctly so that we can understand how the change condition measured in ecological terms is also portraying itself in terms of observed interactions with the environment in terms of ecosystem services. We can use prices to get from ecosystem services in physical terms to ecosystem services in monetary terms. And then using net present value techniques, go from ecosystem services in monetary terms into opening closing stocks and changes in those opening and closing stock values in terms of degradation, enhancement, and other reasons for changes in value. That very sort of simple, or quick, I should say, quick summary of those accounts hides an incredibly large amount of detail. But I don't want to get into that here. I will leave that for others to sort of pick up on, but obviously happy to answer any questions. I guess the point I wanted to come back to here was the connection between those accounts and a whole range of the other accounting topics that we mentioned, or that I mentioned earlier on, that were covered by the SEEA as an integrated data set. And here I've just given a few of the sort of notions. If I take, for example, the environmental flow accounts for water at the top left, so the whole series of water accounts that record flows of water from the environment into economic units like agriculture for irrigation, or the water supply industry that goes to households. When we think about the flows that we're recording of water there, for any given location and for a given point in time, the flows that we're recording in those water accounts should be the same as the flows we're recording, consistent with the flows we're recording in the ecosystem services account. Similarly, if we're measuring soil resources independent as a separate soil resource account, it should align with measures of soil condition, those type, flows of ecosystem services related to soil erosion, for example. So it's intended that there are connections between these accounts, and so the attempt is, ideally, that you're telling an integrated story across all of these different areas. Perhaps I should have picked one of timber resources, where we should be able to see a consistent story between a timber resource account, an ecosystem account related to forests, and those of royalties, or I say rents that are paid by foresters to governments. So all of that information for a given location, for a given accounting period, should be consistent across different accounts. So a final couple of slides on a couple of issues that I just thought I'd highlight, which are sort of outstanding and certainly areas for research. Some of these are highlighted in the research agenda, which is at the end of the at the back of the SEEA ecosystem accounting. I've just added in a couple of others as well, which I think are quite interesting. One is the treatment of the atmosphere. So the atmosphere is out of scope of the ecosystem accounting as things stand at the moment, but there certainly has been discussion about that we might think of the atmosphere as a distinct environmental unit or environmental asset that does provide services and has a condition. It's perhaps most problematic to try and understand the extent of the atmosphere and how you might break it up into different parts, and how you might attribute that to particular sort of jurisdictions or areas. But nonetheless, perhaps those things can be solved, but that's still an outstanding area from a conceptual point of view. A particularly important one will be the definition and measurement of ecosystem capacity, which is really looking at to what extent does the current condition of an ecosystem allow you to continue to supply a sustainable flow of services into the future. And there's some discussion of that in the in chapter 6 of the SEEA EA, but it certainly requires further consideration and discussion, and also in terms of measurement. A challenging area to advance condition accounting is determining a reference condition. The idea being that we should be able to nominate for any given ecosystem type a reference condition, which would be one which is of its highest ecological integrity. And then we want to give a score between 0 and 1 for the ecological integrity, depending on how different characteristics for that ecosystem relate to that reference condition. But it is a challenging area, and it's particularly challenging when you've got modified ecosystems. It's difficult enough with natural ecosystems. It's harder with modified ecosystems. There's an important role in better defining indicators and trying to explain the link between the accounts and the different types of analysis that can be done. So that will be particularly important. And then 2 final points here of research issues, which I think are important in this broader context of the information set for ecosystem accounting, linking to environmental pressures, such as emissions, but also waste flows, wastewater flows, those types of things, how they affect condition, how that then flows into future flows of services. And then particularly in the context of things like nature-based solutions, which is one of the sort of hot topics at the moment, how do we record information about those activities and the associated expenditures and link that to environmental outcomes in terms of changes in condition, changes in ecosystem service flows, potentially changes in monetary value. So I think those will be things to consider as we move down the track. And then a final slide, because I didn't think I should have a presentation that didn't mention valuation. And I'm not going into it in detail because it's just one slide, but I just wanted to cover off in part of the overview, I guess 4 key points that come out for me. One is that valuation needs to consider a range of value perspectives. It's not purely about putting things into currency units and so-called dollar terms. And in that respect, data on extent and condition will usually be very relevant. Also physical flows of ecosystem services. but often you might be able to use that information to support looking at alternative value perspectives. The SEEA ecosystem accounting is quite explicit in not aiming to represent only one value perspective in the data set that it is covering. In ecosystem accounting is exchange value, which is coming from and derives from the system of national accounts, because the aim being to adjust measures of, one of the aims being to adjust measures of GDP. There's an interesting discussion about exactly what exchange values mean, particularly when you're in non-market situations, and how you might value them, or how you might estimate them. But I'll leave that one for another discussion. It perhaps links to the last point, that there is an ongoing, I'd say, progressing steadily. It's not moving fast. We're not quickly resolving the issues around how to do monetary valuation in terms of exchange values, but we are making progress. We still have some real challenges, I think, around aggregation and the use of value transfer. But it's not that these questions have not been investigated. It's more, how do we apply them in an accounting context? And finally, I just simply note that non-use values are not included in exchange values. That's not to say non-use values are not important in terms of our appreciation of species, our appreciation of different ecosystem types, my love of the Great Barrier Reef. But we're basically placing those values where they're estimated in complementary accounts. I hope that gives you somewhat of an overview. I see I've gone a little bit over time. My apologies, and good luck for the rest of the conference. I'm happy to take any questions, but I'll leave it there. Thanks, Lars and Alejandro.
So thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. It cannot be different from the person who wrote the book on SEEA. We have been very lucky to have the insight for the person who really literally wrote the book. So please, if there are any questions, any questions from the floor or from the online audience?
I would have a question, if I may.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. Very interesting presentation. I have a question/comment to your last slide when you talk about non-use values. I just wonder, when I read the framework, it seems still a bit fuzzy. If non-use values are in the doghouse of the complementary accounts, as to say, which is okay. What about spiritual values? Because some of them clearly are also non-use, but they seem to be treated differently. They seem to be full in the exchange value kind of area of the accounts, and I don't see the logic in that, since part of them clearly are non-use as well in terms of spiritual services.
Yeah. I walk this line very carefully. I think the essence of the argument of why non-use values are excluded is that there are no transactions. So in order for there to, there's no transaction between the holding the non-use value and the ecosystem. Certainly the ecosystem needs to exist. That's accepted. But there's not this sort of more higher level of interaction. I can have those non-use values without sort of doing anything. That's the notion. It was but I'm very happy to accept that it's not a particularly it's a difficult argument to write down and to find the right words. The discussion that we had wasn't particularly helped because there's clearly quite difference of views among the economics community about what non-use value is. So that doesn't help. To your particular point around spiritual values, I suspect that what happens in that case is that there are spiritual values which would fall into the notion of there being interactions with a landscape. So to the extent that you were, there was a close, you were going out into the landscape, there was some sort of notion that the reason that you were there was for spiritual sort of things. So essentially, then you get into a boundary issue perhaps between with recreation and other sorts of connections and artistic sort of connections. But I can also see that there would be some non-use things that spiritual would be non-use as well. So I think if we could come up with a definitive notion of what non-use was, that would help. I think the starting point though is trying to get to this notion of transaction. So when we're looking at exchange values, we're there. So that was the thinking at the that we were trying to work through at the time.
Yeah, maybe just one split second comment back there. I would challenge that there's no exchange because somebody pays for it. If it's access-free recreation, the government, or if it's non-use and not recreation, non-use in terms of preserving an area, the taxpayer pays for it as a transaction. It's just on behalf of the people. The taxpayer money is spent by government, for example. So you could argue that's an exchange as well, but just on the side. Thanks.
Yeah, no,
So do we have any questions on site? Okay.
I see a hand up, Alessandra.
Yes,
Could
we
I take a
have-
question
if not-
from the? It's David.
Yes.
David Barton. Hi, Carl. Thanks for the presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me, Carl? Yeah. No, it was a little bit similar to Gabriella's question, but it was taking it from the from your framing of perspectives. I guess that you could look at accounts from a spiritual values perspective, and that would be a way to approach it. That there are types of information in the accounts that could be interpreted from that perspective. My question was, where would you put the human health perspective? Because I guess the way of talking about perspective is also to talk to user communities, and the health community is a really important community. Would you include that within societal benefit, or would you think that we should separate it out? Thanks.
I get easy questions from this group. Thank you, David. The question of health, for me, it does fall into this category of benefits. So our challenge in ecosystem accounting is that we want to understand the ecosystem contribution to health outcomes. So we know that recreation will be important for health. To what extent does the ecosystem contribute to via recreation to health outcomes? And I guess it's the extent to which we can identify that contribution, which makes so the health outcome per se is not an ecosystem service. I guess that's the key point. And as a result, the focus of ecosystem accounting is to focus on the ecosystem contribution. Ideally, we'd like to be able to link that to measures of health outcomes. And indeed, I would imagine that if you were trying to value some services, you would actually be looking at health outcomes and trying to make some assessment backwards to what extent ecosystems were contributing, and that would be part of your analysis. So I guess it's not to say that the health outcome, so it means in that sense, human health is not a direct measure that's contained within the ecosystem accounts, but I would imagine that in actual fact, in many situations, understanding that benefit is part of then trying to understand the role of ecosystems and the benefits they play around water purification, air filtration, a whole range of things. I mean, to the extent that it would include, mitigation of extreme events, which obviously could be very bad for one's health. There's an ecosystem contribution to sort of minimizing and mitigating those risks as well. So I think it's more about how do you place health in relation to a whole range of parts rather than seeing it as being avoided or missed out of the process. And maybe I'd just say, Alejandro, there's
yes, there's one
question in
more.
the chat.
There's one more question by Roshan. Roshan Bushikavan, can you please go ahead?
Exactly. Thank you, Carl, for your presentation. I have a comment, more like also a question for you to maybe some kind of recommendation from you. I find it personally very difficult to aggregate the monetary flows of different ecosystem services to draw some special or cross-special comparisons, because indeed we do not account for all ecosystem services so far. That's like it's much work before us. And also you mentioned also we do not consider non-use values. So I think we should be very cautious in drawing this comparison, because we can, like, it could be there could be some like some biases in such assessment or such comparison. What would be your like personal recommendations and how to proceed in such situation? Because on the one hand, we see the governmental authorities asking for such comparisons and such data information, and on the other hand, as scientists, we know that we have like some like constraint on such comparisons, on consistent comparisons across space. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. I would agree with your concern that you're expressing in terms of not having a complete set of information. The same would go indeed for not just non-use values, but I would throw also what we've called abiotic flows into that mix. So that if you were looking at a particular area of land that had, say, large solar panels or wind turbines, neither the solar or wind capture is recorded as an ecosystem service. But certainly if you're looking at that spatial area and thinking of the role that it plays compared to another spatial area, then information about those abiotic flows will be relevant in assessing two things. So yeah, you're right that I guess the way I framed it before in terms of comparing different areas, I wouldn't want to say that if you only look at ecosystem services as defined in the SEEA, you'll get a complete and exhaustive comparison. But I guess it goes to that, so my recommendation would be, to try and make sure you have as comprehensive a set as possible. I guess the other point that I make, which would come from non-use values, is I think you need to pay particular care in thinking about aggregate monetary values as well. So I'd say, I mean, maybe if you're doing a comparison of flows as that you framed the comment, I would suggest you also want to do a comparison of the stocks and look at the comparison of condition in particular to understand the comparisons between two different locations. So that should be part of the analysis as well.
So thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. We now need to move forward to the next presentation. So as I just said, we just had the editors of the SEEA. Thank you very, very much for your also talking from Australia very late there. And now we're moving to a presentation by Alessandra Alfieri, who is chief of the United Nations Statistical Division. So basically the person in charge of commissioning the SEEA and organizing the SEEA. And so I think learning her opinion on how the way forward will be very interesting. As I said, it's mid of the night now in New York, so she's gonna do it online, recorded, but she will be in the afternoon. So thank you very much, Carl, for your presentation. We have to move forward.
Thank you, Alejandro. Good luck, everyone. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye. And Nicholas, do we have the presentation ready?
Yeah, I was not sure if it would be played from the Residencia or from online, but I can play it if needed.
I think it was supposed to be played from La Residencia.
Yeah, I think so.
In the room, the presentation has started already.
Okay.
But the volume is very low.
Yeah, so we don't see it online.
Oh, it worked the other day. With the testing, what always happens when you test it, it works, and then now we see it, no?
Yeah. But we don't hear it.
No.
But do you see the presentation? Because I think we switched off the volume here. You see it now?
Yeah.
We see it. We see it, but we don't.
But we don't. Natural capital accounting started. This whole started, let's say, in the 70s.
We should start from the beginning.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for.
No, that's it. Now start.
Everyone. My name is Alessandra Alfieri, and I'm responsible for the program on environmental economic accounting. First of all, I'd like to thank Alejandro Caparros and Lars Hein for the invitation to speak about the SEEA implementation strategy and the next step in the global work program. I'm sorry that I couldn't be with you this morning during the session, but because of the time difference, that was not possible. But I'll join you in the afternoon and participate in the panel discussion on the monetary valuation. Good morning, everyone. My name is Alessandra Alfieri, and I'm responsible for the program on environmental economic accounting. First of all, I'd like to thank Alejandro Caparros and Lars Hein for the invitation to speak about the SEEA implementation strategy and the next step in the global work program. I'm sorry that I couldn't be with you this morning during the session, but because of the time difference, that was not possible. But I'll join you in the afternoon and participate in the panel discussion on the monetary valuation. So let me just first start with the giving you a little bit of a sense of how the work of the on natural capital accounting started. This whole started, let's say, in the 70s, where there was this perception that the system of national accounts did not capture the contribution of nature, or did not capture the impact of economic activities on the environment. So the whole idea was really to develop environmentally adjusted aggregates that would take into account the depletion and degradation of the environment. The SEEA filled this gap, but I actually have to say that it did much more than that, because it developed a full integrated information system that measures the environment and its relationship with the economy, at par with the system of national accounts. Last year, as you all know, the SEEA ecosystem accounts was adopted by the Statistical Commission and has generated quite a bit of interest in the global community. In particular, I mean, for us working at the UN, the Secretary General released our common agenda, which is basically his manifesto for the next 5 years of his program of work. And one of the priority was really going beyond GDP. And the Secretary General called for new measures to complement GDP. And in this space, he actually recognized that the SEEA does already go beyond GDP. And so it urged member states to implement the SEEA ecosystem accounts as soon as possible. So what I was saying before, the SEEA is much more, let's say, than a simple adjustment to the GDP, but it is a unifying framework. What it actually does is applies the accounting approach to different data sources, using a system of definition and classification which are aligned with the economic information. So de facto, it actually organizes this information in a way that it speaks directly to the economic data. And this is quite important, in particular for the derivation of indicators, in which, so that we have that the indicators are much more coherent and much more consistent, and they have a numerator and denominator that are coming out from the same framework. So the objective here of the SEEA is really going away from the silo approach and kind of triggers this transformation from the status quo, a change from the status quo. So what has currently been the practice is that each agency compiles its own information system, its own data to support the individual policies. And what the SEEA tries to do is taking this basic data coming from these different data sources and organize it using a system of classifications, which is aligned with economic information to derive then a set of indicators. So this additional step, let's say, of putting the accounts, using the accounts to derive the indicators, it really provides some kind of rigor, some kind of order to the basic data. So what we have in terms of statistical standard, we have the system of national accounts, which is a system, the standard for compiling and collecting economic and organizing economic information. And then we have the SEEA, Central Framework and Ecosystem Accounts, which are basically the standards for organizing the information on the environment and its relationship with the economy. In addition to that, we have also a series of subsystems that focus on particular themes, particular areas. So we have in particular a subsystem of central framework related to water, energy, agriculture, forestry, and fisheries. So these subsystems are fully consistent with the SEEA central framework, but they kind of try to build bridges between, for example, hydrology and the way the water community or the energy community has been used to think of or to generate and collect data and build bridges with the accounting approach. So they are basically going in depth on a particular area to try to bring together the two communities, the accounting community and the hydrological community, or the energy community, and so on. We are currently working on a system also on measuring sustainability of tourism, which is actually much broader than only looking at the economic and the environmental domain, but it also looks at the social domain. There was a proposal of working on ocean accounts. Now there is a group working on it, but the focus is much more on the developing guidelines for implementation. And the biodiversity accounts came from in particular from the IUCN World Congress, and the recommendation that calls for the IUCN community to work together with the statistical community towards the development of the biodiversity accounts. And these are also actually the ocean and the biodiversity accounts are also mentioned in the SEEA ecosystem accounts, thematic accounts that need to be further developed. So the SEEA ecosystem accounts consist in the core accounts that are the stock accounts that are ecosystem extent and condition, and the flow accounts or ecosystem services in physical and then in monetary terms, and then eventually the monetary ecosystem assets. I'm not going to elaborate on this because I understand that Carl has already explained what the SEEA is about. So the idea or our vision is to have the SEEA as the integrated information system that report on, or that allows countries to report to different initiatives and also generate the data that are needed for national policies. So in particular, I'd like to highlight a couple of these initiatives. I mean, the basis really of the whole thing are the SDG, and in particular, goal 14 and 15 are really very much closely related, or a lot of the indicators on goal 14 and 15 can be derived from the SEEA ecosystem accounts. The whole paradigm of the SDG was really to move away from the silo approach towards a much more towards integrated policy, and the SEEA is really the basis at the heart of that, because it's really an integrated system of the environmental and economic information. The Convention of Biodiversity also presents an important opportunity because the current monitoring framework actually already recognized the SEEA as an important framework for supporting the derivation of indicators, in particular on Goal A, on the integrity of ecosystems. But also there are indicators on ecosystem services and expenditures. So we have developed a set of metadata for those proposed headline indicators, and now it remains to be seen what are the final indicators that will be adopted at the COP, which will take place in September, in the fall of 2022. The philosophy of the Convention of Biodiversity has really shifted. First of all, the monitoring framework will be adopted as together with the biodiversity framework itself. And the objective would be really to have countries compiling this data and use this data as for national policies. So what has happened until now, the Aichi targets were more, let's say, a guidance for countries to compile this type of data. And most of the time, the data were compiled using global indicators, and were never really nationalized. So the objective here is to get the indicators that are adopted and compiled at the national level directly. Also, an important contribution of the SEEA is to the climate change discussion. In particular, of course, the carbon accounts would be at the heart of this discussion, but also it is important to note that there is a new data gap initiative, which was adopted by the G20, which basically recommends to further strengthen the data on specific areas of particular importance, in particular for the central banks and the finance ministries. And of course, climate change has been identified as one of those. And it has been recommended, in particular, the compilation of energy and air emission accounts, as well as expenditures. But I think that already also having carbon accounts would support the decision-making in this space. There are other initiatives like the ecosystem dedicated on ecosystem restoration, which is also developing their monitoring framework, and hopefully will be closely linked or will be related to the SEEA. And the Decade of Ocean, the high-level panel on ocean, which has already identified ocean accounts as one of the priorities. And so it is important that these things are aligned. I'd like to note also the work on business accounts, which is quite interesting. There is a number of initiatives to try to standardize corporate sustainability reporting. And so we have established a group which is actually looking at these initiatives and how we can promote the alignment of business accounting with the SEEA. And this would facilitate the generation of data, but also would facilitate basically the collaboration and the further discussion between businesses and national statistical offices. UNSD has become now a partner of the TNFD, the Task Force on Nature Financial Disclosure, and a document has just been released, and it is quite remarkable that the uptake of the SEEA in these discussions. Let me just say a few words on the implementation strategy. When the SEEA was adopted as an international statistical standard last year, the Statistical Commission also recommended the development of an implementation strategy to scale up the implementation of the SEEA. The current status of implementation is we ran a 2021 global assessment, and we had 89 countries compiling the SEEA central framework, and 36 countries compiling the SEEA ecosystem accounts. And these countries were kind of categorized depending on their level of implementation. I mean, starting from stage 1, where countries compiled maybe compiled one account in the past 5 years, to a full implementation to stage 3, which basically implies a regular production of and dissemination of the accounts on a regular basis. Unfortunately, the pandemic had a negative effect in the sense that the number of countries from between 2020 and 2021, the number of countries compiling the SEEA remained the same. This is probably because starting a new initiative and a new activity with which is quite involved, it is difficult without having face-to-face meeting and with basically not being able to participate in and bring together different stakeholders. So the objective of the implementation is really to scale up the implementation, as also requested by the Secretary General, and to have one of the targets that was actually adopted by the Statistical Commission was to have at least 60 countries implementing one account by the end of 2025. And the objective here is to have a regular production process of these accounts, but also mainstreaming the biodiversity into policy and decision making. And I mean, what I was mentioning before, the objective is really to use the SEEA for reporting to the different monitoring initiatives. Be there the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, the SDGs, the National Determined Contribution, and so on. And also to disseminate the ecosystem accounts through global data sets. So the approach of the implementation is really consists on these 5 points. I mean, one fundamental point is really to have a multi-stakeholder engagement. And the idea is to basically bring together data users and producers from the outset to better understand the data needs, and to also understand and to also engage the different people from different expertise, that from the national governments as well as from academia and NGOs. And it is basically an understanding that the national statistical offices cannot do the compilation of the account on its own, and actually no agency can do the compilation on its own, but they have to rely on the expertise of other disciplines and of other experts. And this is really transformational because it's really a big change in the national statistical offices, in the role of national statistical offices, which is increasingly becoming a data steward, and basically in bringing together the different data sources and different stakeholders and applying the fundamental principle of official statistics and providing this rigor and credibility to the data that is being generated. Also, fundamental is to adopt a flexible and modular approach. So the idea is really to start with something that can be compiled and can be done, and show results as quickly as possible, and then increasingly add modules for the compilation, so that and also improve on the compilation as data become available and as strategies also developed to develop new data or improve on the existing models, for example. Using a tiered implementation, usually we have noticed that as for data poor countries, it is important to start maybe with global data sets and then increasingly improve and replacing these global data sets with national data, or using global models and increasingly adapt this global model to national circumstances. So the objective here is really trying to generate and to see some of the results and bring together the different stakeholders and improve on these results as a kind of a collective exercise, and feed this exercise to and feed this data to the users so that then they can generate further demand. Use a regional or a sub-regional approach. We have noticed that when we bring together countries from I mean, they come from different regions, they have the same, often they have the same way of working. They have the same challenges in implementation, and they can learn from each other experiences. So this sub-region, and it also somehow generates some kind of competition between these countries to move forward. South-South collaboration is also important, where basically countries that have more expertise or have already tried this compilation of these accounts can help countries starting the implementation. At the national level, the phases of implementation, the first phase is really a strategic planning and starting in understanding the user's needs, identifying what are the data which is available, and evaluate the current statistical environmental reporting, and develop basically a plan, bringing together different stakeholders and building a coordination mechanism that can support implementation. This usually involves kind of a steering committee at the higher level of the relevant ministry, maybe Ministry, National Statistical Offices, Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Finance, which can also provide the resources and can provide the support to move the implementation forward, and then have technical groups which can discuss specific aspects of the implementation. The blue phase is the phase of compiling and dissemination of the accounts and bringing together different data sources, looking at different models to be adopted, and which then will result in the eventual release of these accounts. Often these accounts are released as experimental. And then here the work towards institutionalization starts, basically identifying the issues that can be resolved as part of the compilation, that have emerged as part of the compilation of the accounts, the lessons learned, and how to actually use these lessons learned towards a regular production of the accounts. And these phases are kind of, they are repeated at each iteration of the compilation of the accounts, leading to towards data which is more reliable and more accepted, and eventually can be elevated to the level of official statistics. But I mean, one thing that it is important is that this data is kind of put out with whatever label the National Statistical Offices feel comfortable putting it, but that basically can start to generate demand and generate discussions for towards improving and using this data. At the national level, what is quite important is I mean, our approach is really very much in building capacity at the country level and providing the countries the tools to be able to compile these accounts on their own. So development of guidelines and material to support implementation is very important. Helping to also strengthen collaboration between the different experts, and learning from and leveraging the expertise that is available. Data and tools are also key. Often there is the global databases can be used as an initial step towards compiling these accounts, and also global models, and then improve on it progressively. And of course, communication and advocacy. So it is quite important that this data is communicated and is put out there for the users, and to build this kind of constant communication with the users community. So just quickly on the way we are organized. So the work is being done under the UN Committee of Experts on Environmental Economic Accounting and this bureau. There are 5 areas. The area A is on coordination and communication, and the objective really here is to identifying initiatives in which the SEA can be mainstreamed and can be promoted to support the development of the reporting on monitoring frameworks, for example. And here is the case, for example, on the biodiversity, on the climate change, on circular economy, and so on. The area B1 is the SEA Central Framework Technical Committee. The current area of focus is on the update of the SNA on those issues that relate in particular to the SEA. And they are currently discussing issues related to some issues are quite fundamental on the definition of assets and the treatment of biological resources, treatment of emission permits, and so on. And then there is the update of international classification. And this is also quite key because we are trying to promote, for example, in the context of the revision of the classification of economic activities and classification of products, the better environmental activities, for example, how to better reflect them as part of or mainstreamed as part of the international classification. Also, the Statistical Commission agreed to for a revision of COFOG, which is the classification of expenditures of government, and this is quite important, in particular linked to this classification of expenditures for biodiversity or for climate change, and so on and so forth. The technical committee on the SEA ecosystem accounts currently has 2 groups. One is on forest ecosystem accounts, which is chaired by Fernando Santos, and one on ocean accounts chaired by Australia, ABS, and the Ministry of Environment. And the objective here is to identify best practices and to develop data and tools that can support the implementation of these accounts, the global implementation of these accounts, and test it also at the country level. The area C focuses on data collection and dissemination. In particular, we are working on air emission and energy accounts. We'll be launching the data collection, and then, of course, on areas for SEA EA. And this is also related to the work of these 2 subgroups. And the idea would be how can we use some of the recommendation from these groups and integrate them into areas for SEA to allow then countries to be able to compile some of these recommendations. Then the area D is on capacity building. So it's basically supporting countries as well as coordinating with the regional commission and with the, for example, World Bank, the other international agencies on the implementation of the accounts, and the area E on the business is on the business accounting. Sorry, it took me a few minutes longer than expected. I thank you very much, and I'll see you in the afternoon. Thanks.
So that was great to hear the presentation by Alessandra Alfieri. There are obviously no questions because it's a video, but as she just said, she's going to be in live this afternoon during the roundtable. So if you have any questions, you can direct it there. Although that roundtable will be focused on monetary evaluation. So now we have the presentation by Antonio Martinez. He is Deputy General Director of INE, which is a Spanish NSO. He is in charge of environmental, agricultural, and financial statistics. And I'm particularly sorry I cannot be there to welcome you in person because I would have loved to discuss with you in person afterwards over coffee or over lunch. But unfortunately, as I said before, COVID doesn't ask when it comes. So you have your 20 minutes presentations plus 5-minute questions afterwards. So please go ahead, the floor is yours. And thank you very much for coming. It's a pleasure to have you here. and to be able to represent the Spanish position and the Spanish experience and the way forward for Spain in terms of ecosystem accounting. So please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. I don't know if the presentation is ready. So thank you very much to the organizers for your kindly invitation to the National Statistical Institute of Spain to present our developments as well as future challenges. Let me first say that this is not my presentation, but my colleagues Julia Maestro and Ana Luisa Solera one, and they are also here with us in this workshop. Let me also say that this is not a National Statistical Institute project, but a national one. So we want to take on board the national experiences coming from the academia, from researchers. Some of them are here with us, Fernando Santos, Alejandro Caparrós. We also want to take on board the experience of the CSIC, which is hosting this meeting. And of course, we also want to take on board the experience of our colleagues of the Transitional Ecological Ministry. I have the pleasure to be here with Tania, and she will be finishing this presentation. Let me start with a bad news and a good one. First, the bad one. The bad one is that we do not have, at the present moment, a full range of ecosystem accounts. Having said that, however, we are putting the first steps to develop a full range of accounts in the coming future. We do have, at the current stage, 7 environmental accounts, and we do have experience coming from researchers, coming from the CSIC, and coming from our ministry. So we are in a good place to have accounts, ecosystem accounts in the coming future. I will be very, very brief with this slide. We all know that there is a central framework for national accounts. There is a central framework for the SEEA. There is a specific manual on ecosystem accounting. Our colleagues, our previous speakers, Carl and Alessandra, they have a quite similar slide as this one. So we do want to explore ecosystems in the framework of national accounts, in the framework of the SEEA central framework. Which is the current situation in Spain? We do have 6 environmental accounts in the framework of the European Union regulation. We are regularly and on an annual basis producing environmental taxes accounts, emissions accounts, economic-wide material flows accounts, physical energy flows accounts, environmental goods and services sector accounts, and environmental protection expenditure accounts. In addition, we are one of the few European Union countries that also elaborate waste accounts. This is in the framework of environmental accounting, but in Spain also develops other types of accounts, such as tourism, and other ministry colleagues develop other types of accounts, such as our colleagues of the Agricultural Ministry, the agricultural accounts, our colleagues of the Ministry of Agriculture, the culture accounts. What about the future? In the framework of environmental accountings, we are now working to carry out in the coming future environmental subsidies and transfers accounts forest accounts and ecosystem accounts. Here you have some Spanish data. In the National Statistical Institute, we work in different scopes. We produce and elaborate surveys on water, on environmental expenditure, on waste, and on these 7 mentioned accounts. Okay, you have some results, some indicators of our products. You can explore our webpage, ine.es, and you can look for results in our webpage in both English and Spanish. Which are the main objectives, the priority objectives in the framework of the environmental accounts, the SEEA strategy? First, we do need to continue improving the quality of the current European environmental accounts, including long-time series. It is clear that we do need to better communicate the relevance and content of the European environmental accounts. We do need to serve user needs by offering future extensions, application indicators, including footprints based on the current European environmental accounts. We have different projects in the National Statistical Institute. These are kind of experimental projects to develop in the coming future, by the end of this year and the beginning of the next year, 3 new products regarding indicators. We do want to have a full range of indicators of the economy, the circular economy. We do want to have a full range of indicators of climate change. And we also want to develop indicators on footprints. In particular, regarding environmental accounts, we have for a long time discussing at European level which are the future accounts that we do want in our European Union regulation. We have discussed about resource management accounts, land accounts, water accounts, subsidies or support measures potentially harmful for environment. But we finally have decided that the 3 new accounts in our regulation will be environmental subsidy and similar transfers, forest accounts, and ecosystem accounts. This is not for Spain, but this is for the entire European Union countries. What about these 3 future accounts? Which is the situation in Spain about these 3 future accounts? First, regarding environmental subsidy and similar transfers, we do have information in Spain. We are one of the 9 countries that have provided data to Eurostat regarding subsidies. So we have a project, a pilot project on this regard. We also provide, since a long time, information regarding forest accounts. There are 24 countries, including Spain, that participated in the pilot exercise in 2018. And regarding ecosystem accounts, we have been active in the INCA project. This is an international INCA project coming from the European Commission. And we also follow the MAIA project, with a Spanish participation. The project is being implemented in 11 countries, including Spain, with 20 different partners. Which is the situation regarding the specific model on ecosystem accounts? In this model, at European level, there will be a mandatory, there will be an obligation to provide information regarding the extent accounts, the site, the condition, the quality, and the flows of services of terrestrial, including freshwater and marine ecosystems. We will be providing information on a yearly basis for ecosystem services, and we will be providing information every 3 years for extent and condition. We will be providing the data within 24 months of the end of the reference year, and the first reference years will be 2024. Regarding extent accounts, the first reference years will be 2027. And regarding condition accounts, there will be 2 main indicators for different types of ecosystems. Finally, regarding ecosystem services, they will include provisioning, regulating, and maintenance, and cultural services. We have, for a long time, discussing in the task force if we include in the regulation as a mandatory basis the monetary valuation, but it has been finally decided to take out the monetary valuation from the regulation. I will be giving you some further information on this regard. Which is the present in Spain? We have a fluid coordination with related institutions, with the academy, with the CSIC, with the ministry. We do participate in national and international work group. We do participate in the working group on statistical environmental accounts. We are part of the DIMESA, this is the director group on environmental sector statistics. We are also part, in my case, I take part of the Bureau. This is the executive body of the DIMESA since 5 years ago. And we are also members. My colleague Julia Maestro is a member of the task force on ecosystem accounting. We have held 9 meetings since June 2021. And let me inform you on the main achievements of this task force at European level. First, we do have a proposal for legal module on ecosystem accounting. Second, we have worked on the ecosystem typologies definition to be used in this regulation. Third, we have a draft of ecosystem extent and ecosystem condition. Fourth, we have discussed on the first ecosystem services, the scope, the mission, the challenges, the data sources. 5, we also have had first discussions on valuation of ecosystem services. And we have decided, as mentioned previously, that there will be only a physical information as a mandatory basis. And finally, we have also discussed on the tools for ecosystem services testing. Finally, what about the next steps? There are 3 issues that are particularly important for the coming future. First, the negotiation of the future European Union regulation ecosystem accounting at the European Council and the Parliament. This will be a co-decision regulation. So it is not closed. We are now in the first phase. We are now in the European Union Commission phase. But this regulation is to be discussed in Brussels, in the Council, as well as in the Parliament. We hope to start this discussion at the end of this year, and hopefully at the end of the next year, 2023, we will have a final test. We do need to start an internal debate at national level to look for the best way to integrate the current national experience, the academia experience, the CSIC experience, our colleagues of the ministry experience. And of course, we do need to take into account the international experience regarding European Union level projects and other country national experience. And last, but very important, it is really an important issue to have a good institutional cooperation with our colleagues of the ministry in charge of ecological transition and public-private agencies. So I will finish this presentation by giving the floor to my colleague Tania from the Transitional Ecology Ministry. Thank you very much, Tania. Thank you.
Antonio, for this presentation and for giving me the floor, and good morning everybody here in the room and also through the video connection. It is a pleasure to be here. My name is Tania Lopez and I'm the Deputy Head of the Terrestrial Marine Biodiversity Department within the Ministry for Ecological Transition here in Spain. Antonio has very well gone through the current status and the future developments that we have ahead of us in terms of ecosystem accounting in Spain. But from our side, we would like to underline why there is an interest also from our ministry in this domain. Also to outline our continued support to this MAIA project, but also, as Antonio has said, the importance of a good cooperation between the different administrations. And as Antonio has said, we've been working with the Spanish Statistic Office already for some time to gather all the experience together and bring it forward to the discussions on the ecosystem accounts. So most of you probably know that Spain is one of the richest countries in terms of biodiversity within Europe. And this is very much reflected by the number of species, the number of habitats we have in our territory, both on the terrestrial and the marine side. And also this is reflected in terms of the ecosystems that we have represented and the ecosystem services that they provide, and also in terms of our contribution to the Natura 2000 network. But this natural richness, it is a very important asset in our country as a basis for human well-being, and we also have to underline this important asset in terms of social and economic development. However, if we want to really fully activate this asset, we really need to incorporate, to recognize it, to value, and to integrate it into decision making, into the different policies, and not only at the public arena, but also in the private sphere. I have the pleasure to participate every year in the annual meeting of the Spanish Business and Biodiversity Platform. And I can tell you all that the business sector is very much also working towards integrating these biodiversity values into their business strategies. And they're always demanding and requesting methodologies to better value ecosystem services and to better integrate them into their decision-making policies. So in this sense, we have always considered from the ministry side that it is important to advance in considering the value of biodiversity ecosystem services in national accounting systems. And this has, for a long while, already been recognized and acknowledged at the international level. If we really look back in 2010, when the strategic plan under the Convention for Biological Diversity was adopted, we had already a target that said that by 2020, biodiversity values had to be integrated into national ecosystems accounts. This has, of course, not really been fully achieved worldwide, but this has triggered a number of different initiatives, and both Carl and Alessandra have presented a number of different initiatives that have been working and trying to advance in this work of ecosystem accounting. And also it has triggered a lot of work within the EU in the context of the European Union. The strategy, biodiversity strategy to 2020 of the European Union already highlighted the need for member states to map and assess the state and economic value of ecosystem and the services, and to integrate it into the national accounting system. So for a while we have been working on how to address this important challenge. And actually the current biodiversity strategy to 2030 of the European Union also addresses further work on this topic. So this is also why, from the ministry side, we have been continuously supporting some work on this field. We have been supporting the Spanish National Ecosystem Assessment that Fernando Santos and his colleagues conducted. We have been supporting the work that was done on the economic valuation of a selection of ecosystem services also by Fernando and his team. And that is why we also supported the MAIA project when it started, together with the Spanish Institute Office, because we really believe that this type of initiatives bring us a knowledge, expertise, and experience that we really need to take into account. So I really hope that in today's sessions we will learn a bit more about the different experience across Europe during the implementation of the MAIA project. I will unfortunately have to leave, but a colleague of mine, Christina, will stay during the whole session. She's actually working with nature information, and she's the one really facing all the challenges that we have ahead of us. So Antonio has very well explained what has been the work that has been going in the task force and also in the discussions within the amendments to the regulation. But really, to be honest, I think we need to say that we have very important challenges also ahead of us in terms of availability of sound and updated data and information, which is going to be very, very necessary for implementing the ecosystem accounts. We do have some gaps still in terms of assessment and quantification of ecosystem services, of what methodologies do we need to use. So I really hope this type of initiatives that we've been supporting for a long while will help us also in conducting and bringing forward this work. And as Antonio has said, it's really important to address these issues with a good cooperation within the different public administrations, but also taking into account all the knowledge that has been put forward by our colleagues in the academia, by Fernando, by Alejandro, by Pablo in the Spanish Council Research Institute, and we'll bring all this together to continue advancing in this field. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Tania. Thank you very much, Antonio, for your presentations. They have been, of course, very, very interesting. So if we have any questions from the floor, on-site or online, any questions or clarifications?
Hi, this is Paula Bando from CSIC. So I just have a little question. I was wondering what will be the spatial granularity that we are planning for developing these ecosystem accounts in Spain? Yes, so what will be the spatial distribution that you are planning for these accounts?
As the other European Union countries, we do need to wait until the final test coming from this regulation that I already mentioned. We are working now in a draft. The task force is working in a draft that will be finally approved by the European Commission. The European Commission has the legislative initiative at the European level. So this test will be sent to the European Parliament as well, the European Council. And we do need to wait until the final test to have the full range of granularity that we are going to publish. But the current proposal, the current draft, is the one that we are working now with it. If you are interested, we could provide you with this granularity, with this different granularity that we are working. There are 3 accounts, as mentioned, previously mentioned: the ecosystem services, the extension, and the condition.
Hello, thank you very much for your presentations and also for supporting MAIA. My name is David Barton from the Norwegian Institute for Nature Research. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I was wondering, is it possible for you to explain the Spanish position in the task force regarding the regulation on monetary valuation? I understand that the task force has recently decided to not include this in the regulation. But is it possible for you to explain the Spanish position?
Well, we are. Thank you very much for your question. We are one of the 9 countries that are participating in the task force. When we first decided to participate, we had serious doubts on our role in this task force. And let me explain. There are some countries in the European Union that are well known by the level of progress regarding ecosystem accounts. Let's say, for instance, the Netherlands. They already developed for a long time ecosystem accounts. So we in Spain are in a situation we do not have, as I previously mentioned in my presentation, we do not have a full range of ecosystem accounts. So why do we decide to participate in the task force? For two main reasons. First, to learn on the experience of those countries that are in a better position than us. This was the first decision. But the second was to try to, in somehow, and let me understand what I'm going to say, in somehow to stop some countries' willingness to put in the European Union regulation a really, let's say, a full range of information that some other countries probably were not going to be able to provide. I don't know if I have explained myself properly. We do want to have ecosystem accounts, of course. We do want to have information comparable among the countries, of course. But, and this is something that Eurostat usually says, if we compose a task force with only those countries that already have experience, that already are publishing data, and they are the ones in the best position, they will go probably to provide with a proposal to the European Union Commission that some countries that have nothing at the current stage, for them will be really difficult to produce. So we were having this kind of balance between those that have already experience and those that already publish data and those that have nothing. We are more or less in the middle. So this was our second objective of the task force. So coming to your specific question, we were one of the countries that prefer at this first stage to avoid monetary valuation. For us, it's not mature enough at the current stage to include in a regulation for the 27 countries of the European Union. Of course, in the coming future, there will be a possibility to include a monetary valuation in the regulation. In the regulation, it will be mentioned the possibility of amplify the European Union regulation by a delegated act coming from the Commission to include in the coming future monetary valuation, but not at this current stage.